Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Thursday Garden Chat. I'm going to do a bit of what's been happening and a little bit of housekeeping and things. So actually today was really lovely. I went off to meet for lunch. I went to meet Lois Moss from Portland, who is who we've got to know through Garden Masterclass. So it's really nice meeting people who are part of the sort of Garden Masterclass followers and family in reality. And it's always a bit strange when you meet somebody in reality, isn't it? So but you know them on the screen. So that was really lovely. And she's in between running lots of garden tours. She's just off to Madeira to run a garden tour. So she's very, very busy. So that was it. That was a really nice thing to do. But also today came through the letterbox May's issue of Gardens Illustrated, and on the front cover is the beautiful, stunning Caisson house, which is just south of Bath. It's a stunning article, photographed by the wonderful Jason Ingram, and I was lucky enough to write the piece, which was a mixed blessing. I love the garden, but it was so hard to write everything in the number count that you're given. But my goodness me, it is the most glorious and beautiful garden. And they are open on selected days, but next week, on Friday of next week, we have a garden masterclass, photography masterclass with Jason Ingram at Caisson House. So if you want to visit and see this stunning garden for yourself and improve your photography, then there are some tickets left. Go on to our diary events page and have a look. But it's next Friday, the 3rd of May, and it's with Jason Ingram, who is the most incredible photographer. I mean, just, you know, if you look at the light on that photograph, he is a master of, no wonder he wins so many awards. He's so wonderful. And then also in this month's Gardens Illustrated, if I just go on a couple of pages, we've got our wonderful full page advert, which is highlighting our workshop in 2 weeks' time at the Plant Library with Tom Stewart Smith. And then next to it, Millie Souter, who works for Tom, is the gardening talent, people in gardening talent, and that's lovely having them sort of opposite each other in the magazine. So if it's about to drop through your door, do have a look. We are holding 3 events during this sort of season at the Plant Library. And in 2 weeks' time, there will be Tom Stewart Smith, his wife Sue, Millie Souter, and myself. It will be a day of exploring the plant library. There'll be a workshop element, actually studying a particular genus, sitting and drawing and observing. Observation is so important. And then Tom's going to take us around the garden. I called it the greater garden this morning, which he thought was very nice, but to not just the plant library. So have a look on our website and see. So the photography is next week with Jason Ingram. That's about 2 miles south of Bath. It is the most beautiful garden, and if you really want to improve your photography, and then have a look and see the event that we're doing at the Plant Library with Tom Stewart Smith and the gang up there. There are lots of live events. Now is the live event season. The webinars have we've got one webinar left actually with the lovely Chris Fellharbour at Chanticleer, but then our webinars subside a little bit because when we've got light summer warm evenings, she says, with a rug around her knees, people are out gardening and they don't want to be sat by a computer. But just have a look at some of the events that we're doing. I also want to highlight, again, we've already had one event, but 2 more events at White House Farm Arboretum, which is Maurice Foster's incredible collection of trees and shrubs. Now, we had Maurice and his daughter Claire on Thursday Garden Chat a few weeks ago. So if you want to sort of refresh your memory, you can have a look at that. But I know that the group that came along were just absolutely bowled over, and they've all signed up for the next one. So again, there are 3. We've already done 1, so there are 2 left, seasonal, summer and autumn, looking at trees and shrubs. And also we have a pruning day there with the incredible Caroline Jackson. And you'll know Caroline from our series called Bad Botany, which I know has been so popular that we've run it twice, and we will run it again. And we'll ask Caroline to expand on her lectures and look at different genera. But those of you that have attended any talks by Caroline, you'll know what a wonderful communicator she is. So pruning is always one of those things that people get a bit nervous about. And so a practical pruning day at White House Farm, and that White House Farm is near Tonbridge in Kent, for those of you who sort of want to get an idea of where things are. So those are a few live events coming up, but we've got plenty more. In the beginning of June, we are at Sissinghurst with Dan Pearson, and then lots more events. So do have a look through, and also if you've got friends who you think might be interested, then please do spread the word. Very important. So just leaves me to say that obviously this Thursday night chat is a free to view talk. Our very kind guests give their time for free, and obviously Noel and I put this together. But if anybody is in a position to donate something or other to Garden Masterclass to keep the wheels turning, we would be most grateful. And there's a donate button on the website. Don't forget, we also have memberships, 2 levels of membership, but you don't have to be a member to enjoy what we do. If you are a member, you do get lots of lovely discounts on live events and webinars and so on. So if you haven't taken time to just look through the website at what's on offer, do sit down with a glass of wine and have a look through and just see what we're up to, because we've been quite busy and we want to share it. So anyway, that's the kind of news from Garden Masterclass at the moment. And I'll now pass over to Noel, who's going to introduce our guest this evening.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you. So this evening we're going to, I suppose you'd call it the West Midlands, Shropshire, part of the world which I used to live when I was in England. I used to live fairly near there. Our guest is Sally Wix, who is a professional gardener. She lives in a village between Bridgnorth and Ironbridge. And some of you, I think, probably will know Ironbridge as this extraordinary place that's sort of centre of the Industrial Revolution. Really, really fascinating and extraordinary, and at times really quite bizarre landscape. And Bridgnorth, which is a sort of rather quaint place. Hope Sally doesn't mind me saying that. It's got a funicular.
No, it's very quaint.
Takes you from the bottom of the hill to the top. One of those really rather kind of singular places, small towns that, when you come across them, you realise you've come across somewhere really special, and it's a lovely part of the world. Now, Sally, you're a professional gardener. So what do you do? I mean, what's your typical working week?
Okay, well, it's just really nice to be here this evening. And so for me, a typical working week is relatively set, actually, because I'm self-employed and I have to ensure that I'm making my income regularly. So, but recently I actually decided to stop working on a Monday. So I use Mondays now for a variety of things, but one day a month I go off to work as a volunteer on a community garden with adults with learning difficulties. So that's brilliant. I really enjoy that. But then Tuesday, Wednesdays, I work as a propagator at the nursery, a fantastic independent nursery here in Shropshire that's called Wild Goose. It's based on in a walled garden, and it's full of the most beautiful planting you could ever wish to dream about. And I work there in the nursery section with Jack Wilgoss, who is the owner, and his wife Laura, who are the owners. And so I'm there out. I go out, I dig plants up, I divide them, I sow seeds, I help look after the violas. So we make I'm making hundreds of cuttings every single Tuesday and Wednesday throughout the week. So that's very, very set in time. And then on a Thursday, I have 2 gardening jobs. One I've actually gardened for ever since the day we moved here. So some people have had me as their gardener for like 17 years, which I actually think is quite an unusual project to have anyway, having your gardener for 17 years. I've watched children go off to university, but I've made some big changes to these gardens. So I'm in a big country garden in the morning, and then in the afternoon I regularly go to a garden which is fascinating because it's actually a vertical garden. It's full of sleepers. It has lots of plants growing in all the cracks and everything. And for years I used to drive past that house thinking, God, I wish I worked there. And then somebody phoned me up and said, would you be able to come and garden for me? So that's that. And then on a Friday, I go to 2 very big country gardens. And again, one of them, I used to drive past this house and it has a half-a-mile drive up to it. And I used to think, oh, gosh, I wonder who lives up there. And so basically, for the last 4 years, I've been properly renovating those gardens. So, but I look after small gardens. I look after my piano teacher's garden, which is tiny garden, which is beautiful. And then occasionally on the weekends, I have small one-off gardening jobs as well. So 2 days propagating, 2 days being a gardener, and the other bit being a volunteer. So that's a regular working week for me, Noel, and it goes right throughout the year. I work as a gardener as long as it's not pouring with rain. I don't stop, because winter is the most important time for any work in the garden, really. So that's me in the working week. So yeah.
Right. So,
but your background, Sally, you know, you had a background actually in landscape, well, before landscape architecture. So you've kind of come into this, yeah,
massively. So I was in my late 20s. I was a housing officer in Wolverhampton, and they offered us an opportunity to what do we want to do, sort of extra education wise, and I chose to go on a postgrad in landscape architecture, and the housing association actually paid for me to study that for 3 years, and in return I actually did all the planning applications for the housing association, the planting designs. And so I then moved, so I had my postgrad in landscape architecture, but I actually preferred the soft planting and working with people. And so I had various jobs. I sort of then became a horticultural officer for a local authority. We worked out of a old greenhouse and ran courses and went to work with schools and had loads of kids in doing gardening projects. And I really enjoyed the community aspect. And this is the thing about being self-employed. You can take one aspect of job with you to the next very easily. So I took another job. I ran a community garden right in the middle of Wolverhampton, working it was EU funded. It was a phenomenal project. And I used to work with basically the requirements were that I worked with people that are referred to as living in priority 1 area. So I would actually go out and work with community groups, helping them grow plants to green up their spaces. Fortunately, the money ran out, but then I started lecturing in horticulture, you know, and design, and then I eventually thought, you know, I really love being outside. So you can just move. So I've had a real varied life in horticulture, you know, for over the last 27 years, actually. Yeah, it's a long time now. Great, so yeah, it's good.
So now this evening's format is a new one for us at Thursday Garden Chat. It's desert island plants. Now we've over the years we've done a number of desert island gardens, which is modelled on the very long-running BBC Radio 4 programme, whereby people famous people are interviewed about their careers, and they choose 8 pieces of music that meant something to them at particular points in their life. And so we adapted this for 5 gardens, and this is our first one of doing it with 5 plants, which might be essential plants or plants that played a particularly important part in our interviewee's life, or plants that they particularly want to tell us about. So what we'll do is we'll go into screen share.
And we should say thank you to Sally for taking on this challenge and being our inaugural person, because I'm sure that everybody watching tonight, if you know, will be starting to think about their 5 favourite plants, and gosh, it's difficult to narrow it down. So thank you, Sally, for being brave enough to say, okay, I'll give it a go.
So as you can see from one of her lists, it's quite a task narrowing them down.
It was a massive task.
So you started off with a long list, you know, like the Booker Prize, the long list. Then you went down to the short list, and then
it was it was a really interesting process to actually go through. And I'll just say to everybody, because I don't very rarely do things like this, I also write a blog, but I have written a blog about this. So to keep myself on track, I actually will be looking back to the blog I wrote, and I just wanted to tell you how very initially, how I took it from all those plants down to 5. And basically, they are plants that actually properly stop me in my tracks. They are the 5 plants I chose. They're all very beautiful plants there, but I worked out in the end that with some of them, I have to physically go and look at them in the growing season while they're actually getting to the point where they're flowering or the seed heads have formed. And there are some in that list that I just think, oh, that is a beautiful, beautiful plant. But I don't keep an eye on it. I don't run around the garden gazing at it every week, you know. So it was basically funneling it down like that. And also, I've got thousands of pictures on my iPhone. It's shocking how many I've got. And also, there was also based on which plants have I actually photographed the most. And so, and the other idea was, which plants would I be happy to actually have them en masse in my garden, not just like in a small collection? So could I happily sit with a whole block of Tonia? And the answer is, yes, I could do that. I really love Scottish thistles, but I seriously wouldn't want to sit in an entire garden with Scottish thistles, because at one point you can see Scottish thistles was my 3rd choice. And when I put it down to, could I have an entire garden of this? The answer was no. It would be very painful if a Scottish thistle fell on top of me, because they are so sharp. You actually can't actually pull them back up, because they're sort of like a triangle with spears on them. So could I have a lot of them and nothing else? So that's how I whittled it down to it. So yeah, so it was an interesting process. I really enjoyed doing it. So
I bet, yes, yes. So now your own garden, tell us about that.
Yes. So we live in Shropshire, and when we moved to this lovely old house, it seriously was a farmyard, brick paved. And I literally John and I moved in, and we bought lots of plants from our old house. And it was really interesting at first, because I wasn't sure how I could make a garden. The main reason we moved in, when I grew up, we had a house that had toy cupboards, and this house, the toy cupboards are here. And I said to John, we've got to live in this house. I didn't look outside and realize it was a yard. So we had all these plants in containers. And then over the next year or 2, I noticed that plants were self-seeding from the containers. And that was amazing, because I could actually then start, because it was black plastic pots all over the place. But by having self-seeders, you can actually cover it up. So all the plants you see in this picture are in containers, but the grasses, like the Amaranthus, actually covers it. So you don't actually realize it is a container garden. And over the years, I've just used more and more self-seeding plants, allow natives to fall in as well. And I'm really happy with the effect. You wouldn't know that's a container garden on a hard paved yard. And it's interesting, John and I rent our house, and I eventually moved from plastic containers, and I made some raised beds out of breeze blocks. So if John and I ever move, I actually could lift this garden up. I could actually lift the breeze blocks up and take them with us, to take my garden with me, because it actually means so much to me. But it's just a wonderful place. It's full of bees and birds and insects, and we spend a lot of time just sitting in the garden, basically, with our feet up, looking out onto it. So yeah.
Gardeners that sit down.
Yes. Well, I work all day now. I've got to sit down at some point. So yeah, so that, and that's my favourite garden ornament. It's like a toucan. I bought it at a flower show years ago. Yeah. Oh, and well, this is interesting. Before I had the raised containers, somebody gave me some white plastic boards to make beds with, to make some big flower beds with, and they were brilliant. But in the winter time, they were the ugliest thing I've ever seen. And so for months, I put it in there just to say, before the breeze blocks came white plastic boards, and that's what I used to look out onto over winter time. But by making these grey breeze blocks, the hard surface is paved grey, so it actually looks like a well-designed garden, whereas the white plastic was, you know, aesthetically it wasn't the best look. So that's why there was just a process, and you can see how the trees are still in, you know, I have to keep plants in big containers. So but yeah, that's my garden in winter time, so nice to see it. Yes, and just to prove the point that it really is a hard paved garden, and this is what it used to look like 3-4 years ago. So lots and lots of containers, and I was more concerned that they were drying out all of the time. So that's why I started making these big raised beds for them. And seriously, we hardly water the garden at all now, because they're actually in these big raised beds that we made. So yeah, so it was an old farmyard, always growing something and dividing a plant up at home. So yes, and those are the delightful white plastic beds that eventually had to go. So but I have donated those to this community garden that I work at, so they have actually gone on to another life, and all the people on the community garden have a metre square bed to grow flowers and veg in now. So it's quite nice that, yeah, they haven't been skipped, they've gone to another use.
And I imagine they're pretty durable compared to wood.
They are massively durable. So and they came from John's cousin who did veg gardening and got fed up, so he gave them to us. So so they did serve a purpose for a while. Right, and this is just as we come out of our front door. We love sitting in our garden, and as you can see here, there's lots of ornamental grasses which I've just allowed to randomly self-seed everywhere. And the main one here is Amaranthus, and it just swishes around in the wind, and you sit next to it, and you're right next. You actually feel like you're sitting inside a garden itself. So so yeah, so from a hard paved empty yard to somewhere that looks like a complete proper garden by using self-sown plants, it's been a really interesting interesting process over the last 17 years. And I'd say last year was the happiest I was with the garden. It was perfect last year. So and we look out onto fantastic woodland.
So these things that are self-seeding into the cracks in the brickwork.
Yeah. So I only let perennials. There are certain plants, if I see it self-seeding, I will whip it out, because I did have some hypericum at one point that started self-seeding in, and that actually was getting in between the bricks. But it forms, the Amaranthus just forms like a mat on the surface, and they actually they survive really, really well. And I've got some Carex testacea, which has been there for donkey's years now, and it is as healthy as anything. It's just really interesting how plants can actually survive in, so, you know, forming these mats of roots themselves. So so yeah, the hard paste service is quite a good way to, you know, make a garden on if you need to.
Interesting. What's the deep crimsony purpley on the left hand side?
Oh yes, well, so that is late autumn, and I do love growing annuals, and that will be an Amaranthus of some description. They are the best flowers for cut flowers. They have the most beautiful tapering shoots, and I grew one that was I can't remember the cultivar name, but it was pale. It was like a pale pink color, and it was just fantastic. But there's one there's some that's a deep purple, and there's another one I like to grow that's called Hot Biscuits, that looks like brown Weetabix. But no, that's definitely Amaranthus there in the corner, Noel. So
right. A plant that looks like brown Weetabix. What shape like that?
Well, the Hot Biscuit one does a little bit look like a Weetabix, yes. With a bit of imagination.
And of course, amaranth is a increasingly popular breakfast cereal ingredient, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And you can
Yes.
eat the leaves. They taste like spinach, don't they? So
Yeah, the leaves do not taste. The leaves are completely tasteless, but
aren't they? Okay.
they are there. It's what is in the West Indies. It's known as callaloo, and callaloo soup is a big standby.
Yeah.
So one huge advantage is that you can stick a load of amaranth leaves in a plastic bag and go off on a cycling holiday in the summer, and a week later the leaves are still fresh. They keep extraordinarily well without refrigeration.
Oh.
So, but we could not sell them as particularly tasty vegetables. No, but they're real universal throughout the tropics, so they're probably packed with vitamins and such like. So, right, hollow bricks.
And those are the very breeze blocks that I have used to make my raised beds with.
Right.
And I fill them with soil, and they're just a fantastic way to grow in. Really, really quick way to make a garden.
Right. And here's your animanthly seeding away and various other things.
Yes, seeding away quite well there. So now it's either weld or woad. There's a very tall conical plant here.
Yeah. Look at the yellow flowers. Is that Tinctoria?
Yeah, and that grows really, really well in the paver as well, and it just looks fantastic. So so that's my garden. Everything you see practically there is self-sown in the garden itself.
And of course we've got the red valerian growing out of the brickwork.
Yes, unfortunately that I do have a cull of that every few years because of that like taproot that it has. It it can actually cause quite a lot of damage. So but we get some of the is it the hawk moth which is the moth? Well, we get a fantastic moth on it basically at home.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
And so on to our first desert island plant.
Yeah. Well, actually, the first desert island plant is actually one that I've actually talked about already. And for me, it's Amaranthus, and it really was a game changer for me in making my garden, turning my yard into a garden. And I put this picture in because you can just sort of see where it is actually growing in the garden itself. I really like it. It's a good perennial. I would say it lasts about 3 or 4 years before it starts to sort of die out in the middle, but it's permanently self-seeding. And because I quite like to have quite a gentle way of gardening, if it lands somewhere, that's perfectly okay. I would just leave it. So we get sort of like plants randomly popping up in the garden itself. So so that's just to show you how easy, grasses can actually self-seed. And it's what I actually want to do. I actually want to make my garden full of beautiful grasses. So that was just an example just to show you there, and also
I must say the thing I like about Amaranthus, which I think used to be called Steeper Lesoniana, didn't it?
I don't know, no.
Yeah. I mean, when I first grew it,
yeah,
and I'm that old, I'm sure it was Steeper, and then it became Amaranthus.
Yeah.
But it's that sort of olive green color that very gradually turns orange, like a very, very slow shift in autumn color. It can self-seed around a little bit too much in some situations, I think, and possibly also flock rather a lot in wet weather. Just pointing out a few possible disadvantages here. They may
all of those things are quite correct, Noel. So
but I find that the parent plants tend to die out. So the seed it's seeds, but the parent plants tend to not be that long lived. So I find it actually not such a problem in that respect. It just moves around, doesn't it?
Yes. We hope that you are enjoying this recording from Garden Masterclass's Thursday Garden Chat programme. We started doing this in April 2020 during the first COVID lockdown, when we did it 5 days a week for 2 months, which was a wonderful experience. Since then, we've carried on doing it just for one session a week. We have always done this as a public service. We initially started it as a morale booster disaster for the garden and landscape industry during a very difficult time, and we've so loved doing it that we've carried on doing this. But our presenters give their time for free. We give our time for free. We do incur costs, administrative, technical, and sometimes for support staff, and we would very much appreciate the odd donation to help us keep going and help keep this a free service, which we'd very much like to do. So please go to our homepage, and down at the bottom there's a donate button, and we'll be very grateful. Thank you. And here it is with...
And here it is. I just think it looks fantastic. And so here it is in one of my summer borders. And that actually is, no, Amaranthus hot biscuit.
Oh, is it? Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. And I just think it's like a beautiful filler in a garden, and it just sort of the pale pinky colour of it looks fantastic against all these lovely Rudbeckias that I've grown as well. So as well as covering up the containers, I just think it's a really important element in the in the garden itself. So yeah.
And these Rudbeckias, what cultivars?
I think those are, looking at the quill type petals, I think those might be chimney. They're quite thin, the petals on those, so I think that's chimney, that one. So so it's one of my, it's not in my top 5, but it's one of my favorite annuals that I like to grow from seed itself. And they last for such a long time, and they're quite tough. They they'll last for a while. So this is just to show, with Amaranthus, what I do at home, I will put containers underneath it and actually let plants grow up and through it. So we've got a really nice red dahlia here, just sort of sitting in a container underneath the grass. So you don't see the container, and you just see the Amaranthus. You just see the head of the flower, and I use that quite a lot with salvia, and I used to have that lovely red velvet salvia, I think it's confertifolia, and I used to have that coming through it itself. So it's a great foil for covering other containers up with plants growing through it itself. So yes.
So now next.
Yes. Right. Well, this is a Fritillaria, and I was very fortunate for about 8 years to work for a really lovely guy called Jeff Bauer, who had a phenomenal garden just outside Bridgnorth. And I went to garden for Jeff after his wife Mary had died, and they needed somebody to look after the garden. And this garden was immaculate. It used to win Shropshire's best garden, and Mary seriously was in the garden from 7 in the morning till 7 at night. And basically I was there 4 hours on a Friday in my last gardening job. And this is a garden that really introduced me to huge amounts of plants I'd never seen before. So and it took me 4 weeks to get back to the same place. So I had never seen anything like this Fritillaria, and it seriously just stopped me in my tracks. And it was sitting sort of in some light woodland shade, and it sort of transported me to sort of like some exotic jungle, and there I was in the middle of Shropshire, in a rural area. And it's just the enormity of it, and it's just an amazing plant. And I did buy some bulbs for it to grow at home, and the bulbs are actually I looked for a definition of what they smelled like, because they weren't particularly, they're quite pungent, and he said it's like a foxy smell. So they're huge bulbs, they like sunlight, and they en masse, they look incredible. They make a real impact statement at the beginning as you're heading into like late spring itself. And I actually toned them with these El Nino tulips, if I remember correctly. And one of my friends actually thought the Fritillaria was plastic, and so were the tulips, because she'd never actually seen anything quite like them. but they are incredible. I have seen them in other situations, and I wouldn't have probably put it in my top 5 if that had been the case, because sometimes you just see them, a single one in a garden, but these were running through a woodland, a light woodland border, Noel, and it was absolutely incredible.
So they weren't. I mean, they weren't in complete sunshine then.
No, they weren't incomplete. I know they like a lot of light, but because of the time they're coming out, the foliage wasn't very big on these, you know, on the shrubs around them, and it was just this blaze of colour. So, but Jeff had some yellow ones, and I don't particularly like the yellow ones. I think they're a bit strident in their colour, but they were magical, absolutely magical plants. So that's why.
And how well do they repeat flower from year to year?
Well, in Jeff's garden, they are absolutely brilliant. Whereas when I had them at home, they didn't really last. But I think mine actually rotted off. But Jeff's garden was quite a sandy garden, you see. So I actually think that helped with the drainage themselves. So that's why Jeff's, there you go. That's what I saw. And I just thought it was just quite a surreal image to have in a garden. And they actually made me laugh. You know, they're quite comical, I think, and how they look. But I just think they're absolutely magnificent. And I'd never seen anything quite like them. And I just think that the veining on them and the colour is outstanding. To have that colour in your garden in springtime, you know, late springtime, is very, very unusual.
It is an unusual colour. It's an unusual colour. The best.
Yeah, I think I see Mary left a lot of labels in the garden, but their labels weren't there for this one. But I checked it out, and I actually think this is William Rex itself. But they're magnificent, and they came back every year in Jeff's garden until I finished working for Jeff, you know, a few years ago. Yeah,
I remember sourcing pictures for a book. I was after pictures of plants in the wild, and I managed to get a picture of this, the red form, growing in kind of semi-desert environment in Iran. Just absolutely bizarre. This very, very dry habitat dotted with these hundreds of these extraordinary flowers.
I think that's the thing. On mass, it just looks incredible. I think by themselves, they just look like they need to be in a group. So bit of herd mentality. So they're and there they are, just sitting under some woodland. So they're out, you know, I think they're quite out of this world, really. I really like them. So, and it's one that we could all maybe try and use if that opportunity allows it, really. So and I just like that image. I really do enjoy photography, and I have an iPhone which I use most of the time, and I think I have a nice little Panasonic Lumix. So I'm thinking this might have been with the Lumix camera. So but yes, just an artistic shot of my Fritillaria.
Now this is not on the list.
This is not
close competitor, I believe.
What I wanted just to say, like, they're about 3 meters away from those huge Fritillarias. Jeff had these most fantastic woodland plants all through a big section of the garden. So we had loads of self-seeding hellebores all over the place, and we had lots of dogtooth violets. It was just it was magical. But I just wanted to show you how that garden, I think that made the Fritillaria stand out even more, because you just walk down the little pathway and there was this entirely romantic tapestry of all this beautiful woodland material. So and my sister Lou, who's a dentist, tells me they look like exploded canines. Maybe that's why they're dogtooth violets. So, but they're just the most fantastic plants, aren't they? So yes, that's a throw-in, because I'm only allowed 5. Yeah.
And now, shrub.
Yes. Okay. Well, we may all have these in our gardens, but I do think Cotinus, you know, smoke bushes, are an extraordinary plant. I took this image at Wild Goose at the nursery I work at, And here it is in its absolutely amazing autumnal colour. And the reason I chose Cotinus over several shrubs on my list was the variation of what it can provide for you over a year. So part of my job is renovating people's gardens, but I really love pruning, and I really do enjoy pruning Cotinus. I actually prune them really quite hard, and in that way you get these extraordinary long lengths of growth in a year, and they're often quite sculptural in their shape, and that's just some beautiful. Yeah, so here's me pruning a Cotinus hard, and that's what you actually get. You get these very, very long stems, and I actually think those stems give a garden a real sense of place in the wintertime. You know, it's proper structure in the wintertime, and I just come along sort of February time and cut them off. And I do like the fact that you've still got some of the Cotinus leaves on the end of the plants themselves. They're absolutely amazing plants, and you could either keep them quite small, or you can actually grow them into trees. You know, they're actually a shrub that goes to about 5 meters, but you can manipulate them to do all sorts of things with. And because that color is so deep, like a maroony purple, it's such a foil against other colors. So so that's why Cotinus for me is a very, very special plant itself, because it does all sorts of things right throughout the year itself.
And in fact, in Derry Watkins' garden, Derry has actually, I think espaliered would be the wrong word, but she's trained her Cotinus along the house in a very sculptural way.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it looks amazing. So it is lovely when people take a sort of, you know, ordinary, in inverted commas, shrub and do something a little bit unusual with them. I mean, they do as at Dixter as well, but it's lovely if anyone's going to Derry Watkins' garden. If you go to the south side of the house, you'll see it's beautifully trained along the house. It looks fantastic.
Because that's what I was slightly concerned about, Annie, actually choosing something like Cotinus as one of my favourite top 5, because it is quite a standard plant. But I have I've seen it in gardens where it's been used brilliantly, where it's added sort of like the rhythm to the garden. So you've got a Cotinus maybe about every 10 meters along, and you just so it's used really. It's not a single plant, and I've seen them planted next to
and in fact I've seen them used. Tom Stewart Smith has used them really well up at Bridgewater Garden, and he's got them sort of growing almost not like a matrix, but he's got them sort of coming, you know, with the perennials underneath them, and they look incredible. And the other thing is, when water falls on the leaves, it forms those wonderful, you know, like little drops of mercury. They are really, really stunning shrubs, aren't they?
Yeah, they're absolutely beautiful shrubs. So it may be a standard shrub, but you can actually use it in a really wide form. But I was really cross once. I bought one for a customer when it was in its deciduous, and I bought a purple one, and it ended up being green. I do find the green ones aren't as amazing. And also in another garden we have one that's like a yellow color, and I love the color yellow, but the yellow of this Cotinus, and it doesn't grow as quickly. It's a much slower grower, whereas these Cotinus they're off like rockets every year, you know, if you hard prune them. So
the first time I saw this result of this hard pruning was in probably the New York High Line, and the stems go up like 3 meters. It makes it a completely different plant.
Oh, well, that's interesting you should say that, Noel, because when I visited the Lingotto, which is the big roof garden on the Fiat factory in Torino, last September for Gardens Illustrated again, Cotinus was one of the few shrubs that were used up there, because the depth of soil is so shallow, but also, as you can imagine, in central Torino, you know, it's either boiling hot or it can be really cold or really wet. And they do look fantastic. So they have this lovely whippy quality, but they've survived in very shallow soil in extreme conditions of heat and cold. So you know, you can't beat that, really, can you?
No, you can't. So
And on to something rather more exotic.
yes. Well, it's how bizarre. I'm choosing plants which are orange. I have no idea why this happened at all. But I was at work yesterday, and as soon as I knew I was doing this talk, I just thought I've got to have Tithonia rotundifolia, the torch, in my 5, and I've just sort of sat on that, and I haven't actually thought about what am I going to talk about, saying why is it my favorite 5. It just is. So but I grow it from seed every year, and I'm so busy being a gardener and a propagator, I do actually forget to sow it some years, and I get really cross with myself because it's just a magical plant. It is the most orange colour. It has the most velvety stem. And it last year, for years I grew it in containers, and they were a bit dumpy, they were a bit short, they hadn't what I expected. But last year I actually started putting them into these new raised beds, and they were a good 6 foot tall, and they were absolutely magnificent. And when it rains, it looks like they've been varnished. And also at home, I feverishly get the garden ready sort of April, May time. Then after that, that's it. I come in from work and I sit in the garden, or I walk around the garden. And what I find is that there's so many insects on the Tithonia, and they're at proper eye height level. So I can actually go around the garden just looking at the insects on Tithonia. And that's another reason why I like it, because they're just, I always know they're going to be there themselves. And my garden goes through various stages of, it is a beautiful garden, but it can be quite green at times, and I live with that quite happily. But at times, so by having Tithonia in the garden, it's a real pop of colour in various parts of the garden while I'm waiting for the rest of the garden to gather momentum itself. And it sort of, it just keeps on going, and it just keeps on getting taller. And it's an absolute, and it is relatively easy to grow. And I think if you haven't grown Tithonia, you ought to give it a blast.
It's funny,
really.
Sally, that you
My
should have chosen
experience with this is
Tithonia.
that it needs quite a long run-in time. It needs sowing quite early. It seems to take quite a long time to build up big enough to start flowering. So something that needs planning ahead, perhaps.
Yeah.
It's funny that you've chosen Tithonia, because this is the first year I've decided not to buy Tithonia seeds. I've just had my delivery from Chiltern Seeds. Other seed companies are available, but of course Chiltern are so good. And I sat there at the weekend, and it was grey and cold, and I thought I'm going to order some seeds. I need to cheer myself up, and I've made a conscious decision not. And I think the reason why is I find that little fat neck that's just under the flower gets very easily damaged. So I'm growing it as a cut flower, and I do find it a bit frustrating that it's not that it rots, it's very delicate, isn't it? And even if you manhandle it a little bit, it just flops over. But I agree with you, it's that wonderful, almost edible orange color that's so beautiful, isn't it?
And it makes for a great art picture as well. I just love that image. You know, but it's interesting. So the blog I've written to go along with this talk about my top 5 plants has actually got a picture of a Tithonia stem that's snapped on it.
Well, they do, and it's so frustrating because they're very delicate, they're quite thick, and they're not even fleshy, are they? It's hard to describe. And then they almost, if you look at them sideways, they'll just flop over, and it's like
flop over. So
but they are beautiful, they're absolutely beautiful, I agree. And but I just thought I'd have a rest from them this year.
Mine probably will fail to germinate this year now. Well, the next images are I wanted to include a Rudbeckia within my top 5 flowers, but I like so many different types of Rudbeckia. It was very difficult to boil it down from the yellow herbstone, which is so tall with the most phenomenal flower on the top. I really like the Henry Ellis perennial that has a really open quill petals. And in fact, I found that at Dixter last year. That was a real treat to find that. And so I thought about all these Rudbeckias that could possibly have sat as part of my collection. And in the end, I chose the Rudbeckia. It's an annual I like to grow. It's called Rudbeckia hirta. I think it's Sahara. And the only reason I could bring it down to this was because with all the others, you know exactly what you're going to get. Rudbeckia herbstones are always going to be yellow, you know, all that type of thing. Whereas when you grow the Sahara one, I like being a propagator. It's really exciting growing seeds and I'm not knowing what's going to grow. So I chose Sahara because I just love the color range that you get with it. And it's really interesting. They are the sumptuous flowers. They really, really are. And when my sister and I are going to Chelsea, and we're going to go and hopefully go and see the John Singer Sargent exhibition, and I went to watch a film about it, and it talks about there's all these beautiful pictures of beautiful women in the most beautiful clothes that are really, really folded silks, and to me they look like the draping of beautiful clothing, and they have a sense of a swagger about them. You know, they know they're beautiful, and they make you. I physically, when these are in the garden, I'm wandering around because you don't know what the colour's going to be, and then the petals are all folded in, and then they're sumptuous flowers. And I think from the tiniest seed to create something like that potentially will last 1 or 2 years in our garden, and that's why Sahara was one of my 5, because I love not knowing what I'm going to grow, what I'm going to get from growing it, really. But they take great photographs, and I always think I do lino cuts, and I always think I haven't yet to make a lino cut of this, and but at some point I will make a piece of art with these images of the of this lovely Rudbeckia. It's they're very easy to grow from a seed. They need a bit of running time to get them going, and I think that one looks like a tarantula as well.
That's a fantastic photo. Yeah.
That's just my iPhone. So years ago, I used to use my camera in customers' gardens all the time. Then I realised actually I'm there to garden. I'm not there to take photographs. So I just use my iPhone.
Yeah.
What's she doing? She's photographing the garden. She's meant to be weeding. So that's why these are in the top 5. Yeah. I think there's a few more of them, but I just think they're the most beautiful. They're the most beautiful flowers. Now, this was one. Every year I have a little competition with myself about the best photograph, and this was my favourite photograph from a few years ago. So this is Chimchimney. This is Rudbeckia Chimchimney, and I just love the openness of it. But it's not as sumptuous as Sahara. That's why it wasn't the number one for me. But they are great plants to grow. They really are. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, great flowers.
And here is a reminder, of course, of some of the perennial Rudbeckias.
Yes. So that's herbstone. Grows a good 6-7 foot tall, and it's quite funny. I work for quite a few people who don't like the colour yellow, so I can't have it in their gardens. I don't know why they don't like yellow, but it's an incredible perennial. Yeah, I really like it. So
yeah, no, they're good. Very, very reliable long-term
they're
thing.
massively reliable. And if you don't like your neighbours, you could turn it into a screen between your neighbours.
Yeah. Especially if your neighbours don't like yellow, that would be particularly.
Yeah, if you don't like yellow.
It's such a shame about yellow. I wrote an article many moons ago for Gardens Illustrated, was doing research into colour and why people don't like yellow. And I found myself talking to a professor of colour from Leeds University.
All
And
right.
yeah, and I had always assumed that your love of colour and your aptitude towards certain colours is a cultural thing. It's where you were born, where you were brought up. Absolutely not at all. It's to do with much more visceral things. We you know, people generally don't like yellows, and I won't go into sort of details because it's supper time, but you know, it's more of a visceral reaction to those colours and what those colours associated with. It's nothing to do with you grew up in Barbados or you grew up in a prairie, in the prairies or whatever, and the colours that you're used to. So it's quite fascinating, but you're absolutely right. It's so frustrating when you get a client that says yellow and you think, oh, and then when you get a client that does love yellow, you know, you feel like doing a cartwheel across the garden. If I could
so
only
many
do
flowers are yellow. I mean, you know, the
Yeah.
Portuguese countryside here is just covered in yellow brooms and yellow
Absolutely.
daisies. I mean, it's just the yellow is just, I mean, like
Yeah.
yellow, presumably you have to leave the country for 3 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Mm.
And in fact, on the topic of colour, we've got a lovely comment from Joan, who's watching from Vancouver, and she's saying, "Wow, I've got a renewed love for orange flowers. What a pop of colour! Makes my heart sing. Thanks, Sally." There does seem to be an overriding trend in your choices: rusty orange.
Realised.
Yeah, no, it's lovely.
And then it's time to look at what tool would you have on your desert island?
Yes. Well, I have a lot of great tools. You know, I use a lot of tools for work, and but I was talking to Jack at the nursery about it, and he said, "Sally, what about your hose watering can?" And I hadn't even thought of that. And I thought, you know, it makes me so happy, my hose watering can. And my husband said, "You can't have a hose watering can as your tool. What about your hori? What about your Nowaki secateurs? What about your snare-bow spade and fork, Sally?" And I'm like, yeah, but those are something I take to work every day. I take pictures of my secateurs all the time. It's a bit sad, really. But so I thought I'd been asking John and Freya for a horse watering can for Christmas present for years. Obviously, I hadn't. But very kindly, a customer gave me some money for Christmas, and I was instantly able to buy one. And the only way I can describe this is, everybody should understand this. If you have a really great pair of shoes or a great coat or a great bag, you feel great. And this watering fan makes me feel great. It's beautiful. I'd have it on a shelf to look at. And the rose on the end of it is the most perfect rose. You know, sometimes when you buy a rubbish cheap plastic one, you're just going to squash all your seedlings. Whereas with a hose watering can, it is the perfect way to water your plants.
Yes, quite agree.
But it's and just aside from this, very quickly. So when I work at the community garden, we don't have a hose watering can there, but I have taught them how to water properly. And there's a lovely guy who likes to wear his Manchester United gardening gloves, and so they have been known to turn things to mud. But I say, well, why don't you stand over each plant and say Manchester United? So every time you water something now, he holds a watering can for Manchester United, and that's a perfect way to water your plants. But you can actually buy, I have never bought them, but you can actually get different roses for the end of these horse watering can. I've seen those, but that's maybe another stage too far. But it's not plastic. It's going to last me my whole life, this watering can. And it was the greatest gift from one of my lovely customers. I was actually able just to go and buy one. It's made me really happy. So that's why it's my #1 tool.
Brilliant.
I feel like a professional gardener.
And finally, book again, obviously quite a few to choose from.
Yes, I have a lot of books at home. In fact, that's only half of them. So again, this was really, I went through everything. And I love that library sign. That came from my mum and dad's house. That was down in the cellar. And I thought, what a great sign to have for a library sign. So I went through all my books, and I could have had a lot. I could have chosen a lot of books, and some of them, it might sound really odd, but sometimes if I'm designing a garden, which is very rare to design a garden for somebody, I will actually look at a beautiful tile book or a book on Liberty fabric to look at ideas for shapes and colours, and then I can actually relate those to design. But I thought for this in particular situation, I've had a garden design book for over 20 years, and it's like it's just come off the bookshelf. It is so of the moment still. You can open this book up and nothing is dated. It's quite similar to a lot of all John Brooks books, the designer. And that was quite difficult, either John Brooks or Dan Pearson, Terence Conran, but
I have to agree, that's a great choice, Sally, because I know when I started my garden design degree, I had this was very much of the moment, and the bold romantic gardens was very much of the moment. But you're absolutely right. The images in this and the combination of Dan Pearson's writing and Terence Conran, it is kind of timeless, isn't it? It's like really good fashion that doesn't go out of fashion. Really wonderful stuff that stays with you.
Yeah.
And I think were they brave, or were they just sort of very bold? Because it's quite a big book and it's very hard to fit into any bloody bookshelf because it's so small.
It sits on top of mine.
Yeah, I know.
Horizontally.
It's bigger.
But yeah, it is my favourite. It is a book I like to look at, because I can gather new ideas from this book, whereas some books I have from design from 20 years ago, they are so dated that I don't actually even look at them anymore. So that's why this is my number one book to enjoy, really.
It was very fresh at the time it came out, wasn't it? It was absolutely different to anything else that was on the bookshelves.
So
no, good choice. Good choice.
Thank you very much.
Well,
and how difficult did you find it to make your choices?
Well, do you know, it was very, very difficult. But what is really interesting, and I've written this on this blog of mine, to say what is fascinating, by choosing these 5 plants, I actually could imagine a garden made entirely of them. I wrote them like, I could be sat on a low slung chair under a Cotinus with a sea of Amaranthus, Rudbeckia coming up through that, kicked off at the beginning of the year with your Fritillaria and a pop of bright orange Tonia against a purple. I could have a garden that only had those 5 plants, and so without realizing, but it was really hard. And as I said, I went to Jimmy Blake's garden through the masterclass years ago, and there I saw Dahlia Murki, which is the most beautiful dahlia, and I really wanted to keep that one in. But it was, again, there just wasn't, if I could have 10, it would be in there. You know what I mean? But it was really good to actually think about what are your favourite plants, and then some of them aren't, like I say, Cotinus, they're not particularly none of them are from a rare plant fair. And I could have chosen lots of plants from rare plant fairs, but they didn't actually. They're not plants I go out and check in the garden to see how much they've grown in the last week and has the flower formed. So that is the difference between liking a plant and having it in your garden and making your top 5. So so maybe I could do that with other parts of my life that need organising.
Well, Rachel Parrish, who's a regular viewer, says, first of all, I have a watering can just like that and love it so much. I bought one for a wedding present for a friend. And then she goes on to say, listening to Sally has been a breath of fresh air. Just shows you how you don't need rare and exotics to be totally enthused. And thank you, which is true, isn't it? Yeah.
I've really enjoyed it. So
thank you, Sally. It's been great to have
Yeah, yeah, no, and yeah, well done, well done taking on the challenge and being the first one to do it. I think that's great.
Thank you.
And
initially I thought it was going to be 8. I thought, oh, this is not. I thought, this is great. I can do this.
Yeah.
But when it was 5, it's like, oh my gosh.
I know, it's difficult, isn't it? It's difficult. Yeah.
And they're all pronounceable plants I've chosen as well. They weren't long-winded ones I'd get confused with. So
well, I hope you and your sister have a lovely day at Chelsea. Which day are you going?
Well, we're going on our favourite. We've been to all the days because we go on the last day, Lou and I.
Ah, for the sell-off.
Mainly because when the bell rings at 4:30, everybody goes to get their plants, and then all you can see is a sea of people and giant.
It's an extraordinary sight. That really is extraordinary. Yes.
Things shoved into taxis. I like the spectacle.
Yes.
Of the last day.
Yeah.
Itself. So we just got to decide what to wear now.
Oh, what to wear? I was going to say. I thought you were going to say which nursery to make a beeline for, or where. If you could buy one plant at Chelsea that you really, really wanted, which one would it be?
Well, I don't know which one it would be, but I would make a beeline for Binny's,
right?
Peony, because in Jeff's garden, Mary had a phenomenal amount of the Binny's peonies. She had lots of the intersectional peonies, and they're just exquisite. So I think I would be moving to, because I don't have any peonies at home. I don't think they do very well in a container. But I would go and look at the Binnies and have a conversation about plants. Yeah, about how beautiful their peonies are. That's what I would do, Annie. I'd go to Binnies.
Fantastic. So we'll probably see a picture of you, with peonies under your arms on Gardener's World, cramming yourself into a taxi or on a double-decker bus. Well, Sally, thank you so much. You've done this with such great joy, and also been, it's really lovely to sort of talk plants with somebody, and
talking plants is really important. And just before we finish, obviously, I just wanted to say, I used to work for a lovely guy called Jeff, and after his wife died, he didn't go in the garden quite as much, and then he started coming in the garden, and we talk about farming and life, because he was a farmer. And then as the time went on, he'd say to me, Sally, come and have a look what I have found in the garden this week. So he actually got back into his garden, and and then he started doing all his own bedding plants. They were just pink begonias, but they were the best pink begonias you could ever see. So talking about plants is it's a really healthy thing to do. It's a very healthy thing to do. So yes, I've really enjoyed it. So
great.
And we'll end on the URL for your blog. This is another reason where we had you on. We've not really talked about it that much, actually, have we? Your blog, but no, it's a great blog. So do check it out.
There's 260 episodes to read.
Wow, that's impressive.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much, Sally, and thanks everybody else for tuning in. And see you soon, hopefully, Sally.
Okay, take care.
All the very best. Bye. Bye.
We hope that you are enjoying this recording from Garden Masterclass's Thursday Garden Chat programme. We started doing this in April 2020 during the first COVID lockdown, when we did it 5 days a week for 2 months, which was a wonderful experience. Since then, we've carried on doing it just for one session a week. We have always done this as a public service. We initially started it as a morale booster for the garden and landscape industry during a very difficult time, and we've so loved doing it that we've carried on doing this. But our presenters give their time for free. We give our time for free. We do incur costs, administrative, technical, and sometimes for support staff, and we would very much appreciate the odd donation to help us keep going and help keep this a free service, which we'd very much like to do. So please go to our homepage, and down at the bottom there's a donate button, and we'll be very grateful. Thank you.